Before we get to our Old Testament lesson this morning, I want to kind of set the scene a little bit, because it's a story that some of you probably haven't heard. Some of you have heard and not really thought it was maybe the best of stories. It didn't reflect the best on God in some ways. And probably not one we're going to teach to kids in Sunday school. So I'm not going to read all that part about it. So those of you with kids sitting next to you going, don't worry, relax. It's not anything like that. In this part of 1 Kings, basically what's happened is the people of Israel have begun to worship other gods. The god of Baal, which is a god, and there are several prophets who have kind of convinced the people of Israel that this God is the real God instead of Yahweh, the God of Israel. And so God sends his prophet Elijah, one of the great prophets, and his job is to bring, like most prophets, bring a word from God, which is usually received by the people like rain on Labor Day, not well. It just isn't a great job to be a prophet. It's rough because you're a lot of times alone. A lot of times the words that you're speaking, no one really wants to hear. They often seem very judgmental, but they are speaking words of God, and that's why prophets, even though sometimes they run and hide and complain and things like that, they typically do what they are told. So in the midst of this, Elijah tells the king at the time, King Ahab, that there's going to be this big big drought, and it's going to cause you a lot of problems. And so in the midst of this drought, God is trying to get them to come back to him. And they thought that would be a good way to start, and that doesn't work. They still are turning away. But God decides, you know what? I've had this drought long enough. I'm going to let it rain. But I'm going to also set up a little bit of a contest. And so Elijah call on these 400 prophets of Baal and have them meet you on the top of Mount Carmel. And we're going to do a test. We're going to make a big pile of wood over here, and we're going to make a big pile of wood over here. We're going to throw some kind of offering of some kind of animal up on top of it. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, prophets of Baal, all 400 of you, make that catch on fire. And then, Elijah, you're going to say to them, now, if your God is God, it can happen. But if my God is God, then my pile will burn. So he says, go ahead, you guys go first. Impress me. That's not exactly what he said. But anyway, I'm giving you the Cliff Notes version here. Anyway, so he says that, and the prophets of Baal try and try and try, all 400 of them, give it their best shot. Nothing happens, just a pile of wood with some kind of rotting something on top of it. Not really the best thing. So then Elijah says, okay. He starts to poke a little fun at him, and he says, bring me a bucket of water. So he douses the wood with water. Then he says, no, that's not enough water. Bring me more water. Brings more water, dumps it on the water. No, even more water. So 3 times he tells him to bring more water to dump on the wood, so then obviously it won't burn. Then he calls upon God, and God sets it on fire. Everybody's amazed at the power of the God of Yahweh, the God of Israel. And the hope is, with this sign of amazing wonder, that the people will turn back to God. Well, then the part that's not in the G version is that then Elijah is told to go down in the valley and kill all of the prophets of Baal. So after he does that, word gets back to Queen Jezebel, and she's not happy. And she swears that what you've done to those prophets, I'm going to do to you by the end of the day, by the end of tomorrow. And so Elijah gets scared. He's just seen the power of his God and what God can accomplish working through him, and yet he's still afraid, and he runs off into the wilderness. And then he leaves his servant behind, and then he goes even farther into the wilderness, and he goes and hides in a cave. Goes and hides in a cave because he's afraid of what God might ask him to do next. and he's afraid for his life. He's afraid Jezebel will get her revenge and get him. Well, that's where we pick up our story here, is he's told to leave that place, and he's told to go to the mountain of God, and that's where we pick up our story. So we're going to pick up there. So he said, being God, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" How many of you have ever gotten to the end of a work year and still had some vacation left over that you didn't use? Anybody? Yeah. The people out at Teeter are way too good. They take all their vacation, but I see some of you are like me that don't always. How many of you have missed important activities in the life of your kids or grandkids to attend a meeting where what was accomplished was insignificant at best? Any of you who are on church committees probably at some point have had that experience. I remember one of the best lines when Bishop Coiner came at his installation was he asked the crowd, how many people of you have ever gone to a church meeting that didn't result in any ministry? And everybody raised their hand. And he said, my dream for this conference is that doesn't happen anymore. You know, I don't know if we've accomplished that exactly, but there's still that's still our hope, is that we can accomplish ministry when we meet, but sometimes it just doesn't happen. How many of you have forgotten an important date in the life of your family, maybe anniversary or a birthday? Anybody ever done that? I don't see anybody bleeding right now, so obviously no husbands forgot an anniversary maybe this morning, so that's good. If I just reminded anybody that it's your anniversary, act like you know it's your anniversary, okay? Don't want to have any problems here. Or how many of you have simply lost time, just lost track of time, like when you're working on a task and you end up wasting like days and days or hours and hours that you could have been doing things that you really find to be important in life, but you're just caught up in the busyness of doing things. Anybody ever done that? Yeah. Well, I know that I've done all of these things. And just recently I got a little bit of a wake-up call. A spiritual wedgie, if you will. For those of you who are not sure what a wedgie is, it'll get your attention, let's put it that way. And you may not have heard that phrase before in church, probably not, but you've surely gotten one from God if you are really trying to follow Jesus. We all get wake-up calls because we all get busy. We all get a little bit complacent sometimes. And as a result, we have something that wakes us up. Mine came when I had this deep kind of feeling of dread the other day. It was just a weird. My wife said, "What's wrong?" When she came home from work. She just could tell there was something off with me. And at first I couldn't really figure out what it was. I was like, I just feel off. And then I started thinking about it. And what it was that I was feeling that I wasn't being a very good father. And it wasn't from a lack of effort or from any kind of not loving my daughter. I mean, completely. I mean, I do. But it was because of all the other stuff of life that was going on that was making me feel like I wasn't giving her my best. And I was letting all that stuff get in the way of being the kind of parent that God wanted me to be, and I think I want to be too. I really don't think most of us go out intentionally in the morning and say, you know what, I'm going to try to find a way to waste a bunch of time so that I have less time with my family. Or I'm going to go figure out a way to go piddle around so I don't get my work done during my allotted time frame, so then I have to bring a bunch of work home every night. I don't think people really think like that. It's not intentional. I don't think it's willful that we try to be bad parents or bad students or bad employees or bad boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives. It just kind of sneaks up on us. And one day we have this ultimate feeling of dread like, what happened? Where'd my life go? My daughter was, I could carry her like a football like this. I did too, because somebody told me, be careful with your door frames. Clunk, don't clunk. So I would carry her like a football so I wouldn't drop her, And I didn't ever. And I never clunked her head. But it was because I was being intentional about it. and I wonder why I wasn't being as intentional with her when she's 4. Or for those of you who have older kids, when they're 7 or 8 or 16 or 25, why am I not as intentional about their life as I was when they were little? Or why was I not as intentional to be loving towards my wife as when we were dating or when we first got married and were newlyweds? Or why wasn't I as good a worker as maybe when I first started out on my job? Have I just kind of fallen in a rut and then, not just me here. It just kind of sneaks up on us. And so on Labor Day, I decided I was going to talk a little bit about recognizing that reality, but then figuring out what we have to do about it. And what we have to do about it is we have to stop sometimes. And Labor Day, I thought, was a good time to do that because, unfortunately, I realized if you work retail, food service, you probably have to work Labor Day. Other folks, you don't have to work Labor Day, even though I know if you're having family or friends over, sometimes that's a lot of work. So don't get me wrong. I know it's work, but a time away is important. In the first reading we heard from Matthew's Gospel, whatever's the word I'm looking for, encounter comes right after the feeding of the 4,000 with just 7 loaves, the other big feeding besides the 5,000 in Matthew's Gospel. And where they had gone was after this big thing, they had been working with Jesus, and Jesus had been doing a lot of miraculous things. They were kind of tired, so Jesus said, let's go. And they went across the Sea of Galilee and went to the other side. They went away to take a break, to rest a little bit, to just sit and not be moving at such a fast pace. Realizing that it wasn't all dependent upon them, that they could rest, and God would still be active in the world, even if they weren't going at 900 miles an hour. And I think that because they stopped, because they rested, that is how, when Jesus said, who do you think that I am? Simon Peter was able to say, you're the Messiah, you're the Lord. But in all the busyness, if they were just going busy, they would have missed that. And nobody else jumped up and said, oh, you're this. Only Simon Peter. So maybe he was the only one that rested well, that really stopped, didn't have the motor running even though they weren't at work. Anybody like that? Your motor's always running. You can't shut it off. It's still running. You're talking to your kids and your motor's running. Just me, I guess. Only then, when he stopped, could Simon realize that Jesus was the Messiah and Lord. Well, that's the first thing. And then you tie in the second one. You got Elijah here. And God, a lot of times we expect God to come in big, crazy kind of ways. And, like a thing, poof, catching on fire and, woo, that's cool. Or the burning bush or lightning. Well, if a lightning bolt strikes me right now, then I'll do it. I'll answer God's call. Or we want maybe a 2x4 to hit us in the head to get it. But in their scripture it says, now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. So it's a crazy wind, but the Lord is not in that big thing. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. So here's another pretty big thing. God's not in that. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord wasn't in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. I don't think that's an unimportant detail. When was the last time you were silent? Not just quiet, not just having your mouth closed, but when did you turn the motor off? When did you just sit and be? I know the answer, not very often. Maybe for a few of us, late at night, everybody's in bed, and you're laying there. Maybe for a few minutes you can turn everything off. But that's where God was here for Elijah. And then it says, when Elijah heard it. I'm not exactly sure what the sound of sheer silence sounds like. But he knew when he heard it. And I think we'd know when we hear it too. But Elijah heard it even though he had been running. God did this amazing, huge thing, and then he runs away and hides in a cave. But God still comes to him. God did great things through Elijah, and then he ran away, but then God still ministered to Elijah. He didn't abandon him. No matter how long it's been since we stopped and listened in silence for God's direction, God is always there willing to listen and to offer us his love and his grace and his direction wherever and whenever we finally stop. I think that's an important message for Labor Day weekend is sometimes we need to stop. People used to tell me when first churches I was at, I had a very good discipline of every 3 months I went on a retreat for 3 days down at St. Meinrad in southern Indiana and hung out with the monks. One thing about monks is, yes, they can party. They really can. But they also know how to be quiet and listen to God. And so I would go down there and I would just do that. I'd get a little room and I'd be in my little room and they had prayer times. I'd go to prayer times, but then I'd come back and I'd just be in my little room or I'd go out and walk around their beautiful grounds and just be quiet. I wouldn't talk much. I would just be quiet and listen. And people would say to me when I got back from those 3 days that they could just see something different about me. And I'd go to the mirror and go, still look the same to me. But they could see a change in me because I took that time every 3 months to go and get reconnected to God, to stop doing and just be for a few days. And that being allowed me to be who God wanted me to be, allowed me to be a better husband. That time I didn't have a child, but I'm recommitting myself to this discipline because I think it would make me a better parent, better spouse, a better pastor, better friend. I think anytime we have a big decision or we're feeling overwhelmed, we need to stop and just let God back into our lives. Maybe we all just need a little spiritual wedgie once in a while. So why don't you turn to your neighbor? Just kidding. I wouldn't I wouldn't do that to you. One of my old neighbors growing up used to hang his brother on a fence post. That's bad. Anyway, not very kind. Kids, don't do that. But next time you feel God trying to get your attention, just stop. Don't try to figure it out all right that second. Stop. And listen to the silence of how God's calling you back to Him. So now take a couple moments in silence in preparation for communion, and then we'll sing our hymn of preparation together. So just sit in silence for a minute.